Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cheers, Love, an Overwatch fan retrospective podcast. Sorry, an Overwatch League fan retrospective podcast. My name is Samson. I am your host for today. This is part of Grow Up, Level Up. I am the host of that show as well. But right now, you are here with Cheers, Love, a podcast where we reminisce about the end of the Overwatch League, or is it? Basically, the goal of this podcast is to bring on fans that were fans of the Overwatch League, maybe the entire league, maybe specific teams, and chronicle their journeys, their experiences, their memories, and immortalize them on the power of the internet. Today on our show, we are bringing on a special guest all the way from Canada, which is where this show is recorded anyways. Please welcome Jordan, aka Sir Dr. JM. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Clap, 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 clap. Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Welcome to the show. Speaking of clapping, I believe there is a clapping sound effect, if that works.
Do you have a soundboard?
There is a soundboard built into this.
Sick. Thank you. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, without getting too much into the nitty gritty, we're using something called Riverside to record, and it's got a built-in soundboard. It's kind of fun.
That's awesome. I'm a big fan of this. You should have mentioned that before we recorded. We talked about it a little bit, but you didn't say that. Now I'm going to be all over Chris to change up what he's using.
Speaking of that, Jordan, welcome to the show. What is your claim to fame, I guess, in the Overwatch League? And
my claim to fame, I was going to say it's not much of a claim to fame, but I don't want to insult Chris too much. I'm on two other podcasts, one run by myself that is called Man Watchpoint. It is an Overwatch podcast where we talk about everything going on in the wonderful world of Overwatch. That does include the game itself as well as the Overwatch League. And that is, of course, my solo podcast that I started all on my own back in 2020, I believe. We just posted episode 128, and as the Overwatch League is over, we're now transitioning to an every other week format. We find out what's going to happen in the Overwatch League, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. And then through doing that, I was eventually invited to be on the ReadySetPwn podcast. ReadySetPwn is your premier source for everything Vancouver Titans and Toronto Defiant around the Overwatch League.
Very cool. Yeah, ReadySetPwn, friends of the show. Man Watchpoint, of course, friends of the show.
Yeah, I better be.
Two also really great podcasts to get your Overwatch content. Speaking of Overwatch, I guess, spoilers, this is an Overwatch podcast. We do dive into the nitty gritty. How did you get into Overwatch, the game?
I think it was pretty average story, honestly. There isn't much of a story behind it. I kind of followed some of the development. Back in the day, I was playing World of Warcraft, and StarCraft 2 came out and dipped my toes in there along the road and everything like that. But I was just always kind of aware of Blizzard games, I guess. Never really played Diablo or the original StarCraft or Warcraft 3 and stuff like that, just because I was a little bit younger back then. But I always knew of the sort of reputation of Blizzard, and then through playing World of Warcraft, obviously learned a lot more about them, and eventually Project Titan, which was the original vision for Overwatch, and spent many years in development. I think it kind of fell through the floor, and from the development of that, they started working on Overwatch. And once they announced it, it was very much kind of like I'm into first-person shooters. This could be fun. At the time, I was big into Call of Duty. Of course, that was kind of during the rise of Call of Duty becoming the juggernaut that it is now. The original Modern Warfare days, and the original Black Ops days, that kind of thing. So, just knowing Blizzard games, following the development, and then the game came out and seeing the wonderful reception to it. I think they did a couple free play weekends or trials, shortly after the game actually came out, around the holiday season, stuff like that. And sure enough, tried it out and was just astonished by, how fun it was, how it really felt like anyone could pick up a controller or, a mouse and keyboard if you're one of those PC nerds, and you could just pick up and play, right? And so started playing from there, and I guess I just never gave up the goat there. So
That's awesome. So you're not new to shooters. This is not your first shooter, but what makes Overwatch stand out from like Call of Duty or even other shooter games like Valorant and Counter-Strike?
I mean, coming from, well, you want to talk history there. I sort of cut my teeth with Call of Duty, but through playing that, I also discovered that, I had friends who, prior to Call of Duty, were playing Counter-Strike, and, they sent me on the path of trying out, this is back in the 1.6 days, and then Source and everything like that. So, played through that. And then obviously Team Fortress 2 eventually came after that as well. Of course, these are all Valve games. And I think Team Fortress 2, obviously, a lot of people will, draw natural parallels between Team Fortress 2 and Overwatch because they're very sort of class-based games. Each character plays a different role on the battlefield, but also they have a lot of personality. And I think that's kind of really what set Overwatch apart and, kind of put it in a league similar to Team Fortress 2, because Team Fortress 2 very, very personality based as well, where you have these characters and this art style that really kind of celebrate more than just the gameplay, right? I would say that, sure, Modern Warfare, beautiful game, whatever, great graphics, very picturesque, that kind of thing. But ultimately, at the time, especially, you were playing, Nameless Soldier 1, 2, 3, 4, or Nameless Bad Guy 1, 2, 3, 4, that kind of thing. And Overwatch, of course, is just, I think most people would agree. Even if you don't like the game, it's dripping with personality and style, and it has a clear art direction and vision for what they want you to feel when you're looking at the game. So
totally, yeah. It's definitely stands out. There's games that look like it, but no games that also smell like it, I guess.
It's true.
The other side.
Smell-o-vision in games.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not. I do not want to smell certain games.
Wonder what Roadhog smells like.
Oh no. So thanks for sharing about Overwatch the game. How'd you get into the Overwatch League?
The Overwatch League, honestly, I don't really know. What my wife will tell you is that I just kind of pick something and then hyperfixate on it sometimes. And, I think a lot of the time that's associated with ADHD, which I do not have. But for whatever reason, after playing Overwatch for so long and being really into it, I wanted more. And I knew that the Overwatch League was a thing, and I knew esports were a thing. And I mean, hey, if esports had been what they are now when I was in high school, I definitely would have probably missed a lot more school trying to make it happen. But I just kind of dove into the league once I made that decision to really kind of get into it, and that was around stage 2 of season 2. So I did not follow during the inaugural season. I knew about it, I knew when matches or the occasional match happened. I knew who won the first season, things like that. But I never really got into it until I honestly just decided to. And then the rest is history.
Were you into esports before this specific one, or was it always just in the back of your mind kind of thing? I guess, yeah.
That was kind of the thing, was like, for me and, probably my closest friends, I wanted to be into esports. That was back in the MLG days, right? Major League Gaming. Before esports, I think, were as widespread as they are now. And that's a relative term, because I think esports is still relatively niche, right? But it was very much, my friends and I, we would go to, for example, the Calgary Comic Expo, and we were always there for the gaming side of it, which was relatively small. But we would go and seek out the booths that were doing tournaments in Call of Duty and other games like that. And of course, it was PC, so I always bombed us. But anyways, we always wanted that to be a big thing, and it never really was. And so then I think that was a part of the draw of coming into Overwatch League is, I already knew I loved the game. I already knew I understood the game and how it worked and everything like that. And then finding out that, oh, it's, city-based franchises. Oh, it's set up in the same way as a traditional sports league, because I do think that has always been sort of a barrier to esports, is that for an average person to jump into it who maybe just knows the game, esports can be hard to follow the format. It can be hard to understand how matches are set up, or where they're coming from, where these players are, or sort of where these teams are based, because that's not really been a focus. And I think that's why I kind of latched onto the Overwatch League, right? Because, traditionally I'd been a NHL fan, which traditional sports, easier to understand that format, because growing up in North America, I'm surrounded by it all the time. So,
yeah, that's a really great point you bring up. It's familiar to maybe the average person because they've seen it represented in other sports, or traditional sports like the NHL, NFL. There's a start and stop and stages and all that. Yeah, that's a really cool point.
And it's a very North American perspective, because I know, in Europe and things like that, obviously, where soccer, or, traditional football is much bigger. They do have leagues like this, right? And they have relegation and things that I've learned all sorts of things about, once I expanded my horizons. But yeah, prior to that, I didn't know any of that. So.
Oh, interesting. That's that's kind of funny. I actually got into watching hockey and CFL, NFL because of Overwatch League. I'm like, oh man, they do this over in the traditional side as well. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's funny.
So what teams did you cheer for during the Overwatch League?
Well, the story I always tell goes a little something like, I'm from Calgary, Alberta, now living in Edmonton, but being from Alberta, traditional sports mindset, if you are anywhere in Canada, you look at Toronto and you go, I cannot cheer for Toronto. I will not cheer for any team out of Toronto, because the only people that like Toronto are people that are from Toronto. And even a lot of them, I don't think like it there. You'll also notice that I am saying Toronto. I emphasize the TO at the end, whereas people from Toronto generally don't. And so, it's kind of a giveaway that I'm not from there. Anyways, I looked at the team in Toronto and I said, I can't cheer for you guys. But of course, being from Calgary, I looked at the team in Vancouver and said, man, I can't cheer for you guys either, because Calgary, of course, has a rivalry with the world, really. It's Calgary against the world in a lot of ways. So anyways, at that point, I said, well, I have to cheer for a Canadian team. Let me look at the standings. And of course, at that time, the Vancouver Titans were the former runaway squad. They were probably top of their game. I think they were just about to be, or had just been, defeated by the San Francisco Shock in that stage. Or perhaps they had just won over them. I can't quite remember now.
They were in the top three pretty much the entire time.
Exactly. Yeah. They were the top dogs along with San Francisco. Of course, it was GOAT's meta, which, if you're not familiar with the Overwatch League, that is gibberish to you, but I won't go into it. Anyways, if you're not a fan of Overwatch League, I'd be surprised if you're listening to this. But
very true.
But, Vancouver was just top dogs at the time. And I said, all right, I'll go by the standings. So I started cheering for Vancouver. Of course, things happened. The team changed a great deal over the coming years. And I just kind of, in losing that original connection to the original squad there, I broadened my horizons and said, hey, let's look at Toronto. And that's kind of how I discovered that Toronto also had a really great community. They'd done a really good job of fostering, that sense of community and that sort of city-based, growth, I guess. It really felt like if you were in Toronto, you knew about the team. You wanted to be a part of that. So I really appreciated that, especially given everything that happened with the changes in Vancouver. It didn't really seem like that was a focus for them. So I started following Toronto. And then on top of that, I looked at Florida and said, I like your new redesigned colors. And I started following Florida as well. Beyond that, of course, the league is, in a lot of ways, most teams are notorious for not retaining talent for a long time. It's kind of the nature of esports, because your lifespan in esports is a lot shorter than traditional sports. And so from there, I kind of just started following players more than anything. Of course, I would always cheer for the Vancouvers, the Torontos, and the Floridas. But in a lot of ways, it was, I mean, jumping ahead a couple questions here, or maybe just to the next one. A player like Twilight, who started with the Vancouver Titans, and I watched go to the San Francisco Shock, and I watched go to the Boston Uprising. I will always cheer for Twilight because he was such an excellent player who continued to display that. And I had that original connection with him. Even, again, a lot of those players from the original Vancouver squad, following Slime, actually, he went to Florida at one point, following players like Janu and wanting to see them succeed regardless of where they were, I think was a big part of it for me. So,
yeah, that's like a uniquely, mostly uniquely esports thing is people tend to follow the players. I know a friend of ours, Lauren, Daybeck Owl also does this. She follows the players. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very interesting esports esports feature, I guess.
Yeah,
for lack of a better term.
I think in a lot of ways, again, just comparing it to traditional sports, obviously those players have a lot longer lifespan in the sport most of the time. You can continue playing from your early 20s into your 30s if you so choose. Whereas in esports, I mean, a lot of these people get into it when they're, maybe mid-teens to high teens, but don't really go pro until they're, able to, 18 or so. And then a lot of them, their career is over by the time they're, low 20s. A player who is mid-20s is a veteran, right? You look at the Crimsos or the Vancouver Titans, you look at Punk. These guys are still young, but in terms of the esport, they're at the end of their career, right?
Totally.
So
yeah, it's really trippy. I always compare or not Overwatch, like esports to like summer camp, where summer camp also has a very young demographic. Like right. I remember being in my early 20s, and I'm like one of the oldest staff there. I've been working there 5 years. I've been people look up to me for leadership, but in the grand scheme of things, I had so much to learn. Like not just
I don't know anything. I came to this camp for 5 years, but I just know how to make a fire.
Now I have my staff. That's crazy.
Totally.
Yeah, that is very interesting in esports. Very young, but hopefully it lasts longer and players stay and play longer, because it is like traditional sports, a game that can last as long as it could. Are there any other players that you like to cheer for and followed around?
I mean, honestly, I actually meant to look up some rosters beforehand, because of course it's always, when I'm watching them play and I'm going, oh yeah, I forgot this person was on this team, or oh, I'll put that game on because I know this person is on that team. Twilight is a big one, obviously, like I said, following his kind of career through the Vancouver Titans and everywhere that he went. I'm trying to think. I mean, before he retired from Overwatch League in total, Surefour was always one, and I mean that was in part because he's also an Alberta boy. He's from Lethbridge, Alberta, where I went to school for a while and things like that. So
that's cool.
He was a fun one to watch. But then building, I want to say relationships, but building a connection with these players just based on following them was always fun. I mean, Slime is another one that I know I mentioned already. Unfortunately, so many from that original Vancouver Titans roster kind of after they left Vancouver, a handful of them stayed in the league, but most of them for that season following, it was probably about half and half who stayed and who didn't. But nowadays I don't know that any of them are playing other than Twilight, right? I think he was kind of the final remaining one. And even he was, for all intents and purposes, benched on Boston's roster. And just today, I believe Boston announced that they were letting go of just about everyone. I think there's only maybe 2 players that they hadn't spoken about last time I checked. So that's also interesting. But for analysis, you want to go to ReadySetPwn or Man Watchpoint. Speculation and analysis. But yeah, it's interesting how short or how long in the grand scheme of things these players last in the league and play this game. Speaking of
experiences in the league, what are some of your favorite ones?
That's a great question. And especially given sort of the state of Overwatch, right? Obviously, the original pitch, and I think this was actually probably also a big part of why I started following Overwatch League is the original pitch, of course, was they were going to do a couple of seasons, based out of a central location. So they were sort of based out of LA, I believe, Anaheim, something like
Burbank,
that.
California.
Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, teams would go to their, regionalized location, their geographic city that they were representing. And of course, these teams would play live every time they played, in a stadium of some sort, featuring or hosting teams there, whatever, every time they played. And that was a big draw, right? The fact that, hey, live sports are fun. If you enjoy competition, I find it generally doesn't matter what sport you're watching. It's fun to be a part of the crowd. It's fun to feel that energy. And that was a big part of sort of why I got into Overwatch League, was the prospect of, you could see live matches, right? It is the dream, the dream from when I was a teenager playing Modern Warfare, the dream realized, getting to see these players on stage, which I think to a lot of average people, a lot of normies, it can be weird, right? Why would I watch a bunch of players sit on a stage when, they're just sitting there playing on a computer? But the fact
I'm
is,
not watching them. I'm watching a character on the screen.
Exactly. But, the fact is, it's the competition, right? It's the feeling in the stadium there and everything. So that was a big part. I really had wanted to go to, see a match in Vancouver. And of course, COVID changed everything. That dream happened, for a handful of teams. The season started that way. But COVID, changed things, and suddenly everyone was basically playing on LAN. And it kind of became in a lot of ways for me, another big selling point of esports in general, but the Overwatch League is the fact that, hey, this can continue in an online format with, there were hiccups because they had to figure it out, but very little resistance. And I actually kind of, not in a real way, but I took a little bit of an issue how a lot of professional sports kind of got certain exemptions and things like that to continue playing their sports. For some reason, it just,
the bubbles and
it didn't sit right with me that these professional athletes who were making hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of dollars, were given these rules that said, hey, you can just continue to play, but there will be no audience or whatever, right? It kind of felt to me like, hey, maybe there should be an adjustment of how these people are treated as celebrities, and maybe we should, reallocate some funds to people who really deserve this. Anyways, the world was a different time. I'm getting so off topic here. Experiences in the league. That was something that I had really looked forward to, and unfortunately that never happened. But then getting to see when the league did do these live events, and especially, in later seasons, once we were over the hump with COVID, doing these sort of mid-season tournaments and everything like that, and getting to see what that looked like from afar was always such an exciting thing, and obviously very much made me want to go and get to experience one of these. And then, of course, Summer Showdown last year happens in Toronto. Unfortunately, wasn't able to make it, but that was such an exciting thing to see. And the fact that Toronto seemed like they, as an organization, they really put their all into celebrating Overwatch. Of course, when it came down to it and grand finals were announced to be in Toronto this year, I kind of knew I had to make it work. And I was definitely on the verge of bailing out just between costs and everything. But then with the fate of the league, in a lot of ways, I have to be thankful that we got wind. Like, I think technically it was leaked that the league might not be coming back, after
Yeah,
this
yeah.
season. I think it was, I don't remember if it was Jacob Wolf or not that kind of broke that, but someone online, caught wind that, hey, the owners are voting. This league may not be around after that. And it was kind of once that was announced that, my wife kind of said to me, well, I guess you're going now. I guess there's no question about
Wow.
it because,
Yeah.
again, finances are tight for everyone. And I was just at a point where I was like, I don't think it's worth it. Because there will be another chance. And guess what? It very quickly became, there won't be another chance. And, in a lot of ways, I guess I kind of got to be grateful for that, because don't know that I would have gone if we hadn't known that information, and I would have really missed out. So.
Oh, that's fair. The irony was last year, my fiance and I decided to make a big trip to Toronto. It's like, well, like esports never comes to Canada. Like Canada never gets to be the center of esports, even for a little bit. We got to go to Toronto, and then the year later, it's the actual grand finals, the final grand finals.
Totally.
Yeah. No, that's awesome that you got to go and be there and kind of represent Western Canada. I feel like.
I honestly, I wish it's so funny because, like, I'm walking around, obviously, again, thank you to ReadySetPwn for hooking me up. Thank you to the Toronto organization for also hooking me up with a media badge. I'm walking around with this media badge, which was yellow. It's right here on my wall, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And it says media there. Hopefully that didn't make too much noise on the mic. But I'm walking around, and it felt in a lot of ways like, I wish it was like real life World of Warcraft, where you have this thing over your head that says who you're there with, because everyone kind of looks at you like, should I know you? But then they also see that, someone like me, I'm not necessarily, bumping shoulders with every single person there. And so they're kind of like, yeah, he's a nobody. And it was a little bit like, I just wish there was some way to say, hey, here's who I'm here with, come talk to me. I swear I'm nice. That kind of thing. Right. But, yeah, it was, hey, it was an awesome experience regardless. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So,
yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad you had a really good time. Is there any other stories you want to share from that grand finals experience?
Oh man. I don't know that I have any like specific stories to share.
Sure.
The big sort of thing was just how friendly and welcoming everyone was. I'll talk a little bit more about that once we wrap up, but the crazy thing was just seeing all these people, players, organization members, even Overwatch or just Overwatch League people, right? Like Sean Miller, for example, just seeing them there and it being such a welcoming environment. On the first day I went and sat down, literally just saw the CEO of Overactive Media, the company that owns the Toronto Defiant. Just saw him sitting in the stands. And of course, I've spoken to him before through ReadySetPwn, but saw him sitting in the stands and went and chatted with him for a good 30, 40 minutes, right? At one point, I was standing just kind of watching things, and I turned around and Sean Miller was behind me. So I said hi to him and spoke to him for 20, 30 minutes, right? So it was just, the overall energy and vibe of the place was just so nice, so open, so friendly and welcoming. I think that in a lot of ways, I almost feel like it kind of changed my perspective on esports, right? I wouldn't do that kind of thing at a hockey game. I wouldn't feel that, comfortable with all the other fans in the stadium, even if they were supporting the same team as I am. But I really felt like, I could just turn around, strike up a conversation with anyone. So
I think that's what makes the Overwatch community very special, is everyone's super open. It's a very welcoming community, even though we're all just fans of this game. Like everyone just is, super welcoming of each other. There's no tribalism. Everyone's in it for the love of the game.
Totally.
What's your hope for the future of Overwatch esports then? It's a more kind of a blank slate for next year. There's no plans, nothing. We know nothing. Like what's your hope if in your dream scenario?
My hope and my dream, it's tough because my dream would have been that it worked.
Yeah.
It worked, and these teams aren't going to collapse amongst themselves and have to pull a phoenix and rise from the ashes or something like that. Obviously, we know that. I think we're pretty confident that that's not going to happen. Again, conversations that were had with various people over at grand finals, it seems like everyone has basically accepted that the league is going to be no more. Now, what do I see it being in the future? It's tough. I know Kade, one of your other guests on Cheers Love. I saw him at grand finals, met him. We follow each other now. He's a great guy, but I know he had spoke about the sort of Apex glory days, the Overwatch League, pre-Overwatch League. I don't know that that's necessarily the right play, nor what will actually happen. If I had to guess, I think the league would be kind of crazy to just abandon everything they have built. I don't see it as, honestly, a financially sound decision to say, okay, Overwatch League is done. Get rid of all the marketing, get rid of all the branding, get rid of all the, goodwill or just maybe will that we've built up with the community. I do think that they will come back in some form and likely maybe refresh a lot of that. I don't think it'll be the same format. I don't think it'll be franchise-based or geographic franchise-based. But I'm hopeful that it comes back in a familiar yet different way. Again, I think that's probably realistic because I don't think it would be a very sound decision to just scrap it all. And one of the things I've kind of theorized on ReadySetPwn and Man Watchpoint is that they come back as Overwatch League. It's the same kind of name. They can use the logo, they can use the branding, but it's more of an umbrella where beneath that is Overwatch Esports North America, Overwatch Esports Korea, Overwatch Esports EMEC,
South America.
South America. They have these different regions, and that does kind of play into what most esports are doing, with maybe like Call of Duty League being the sort of exception. I think that is traditionally what we see in League of Legends and Valorant and, Rocket League and other esports like that. But I would be hopeful that it's recognizable, even if it's not the exact same product. That's kind of my master plan.
I think that's the most reasonable take.
Yeah, and I don't know that. I just don't know that going back to a format that happened, pre-Overwatch League is the right answer. One of the things that I had heard is, a lot of the confusion around what happened in the Eastern region this season is exactly what would happen if they went back to sort of the Apex days. I wasn't following Overwatch League in that, during that time, so I can't say what that really means. But I know the East region was hard to follow this year, seeding and format wise and everything. So
yeah, I had no idea what was going on.
No, me neither. Me neither.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have any hopes for the future of the game itself?
Future of the game itself is an interesting one because I don't know that I had ever thought of the future of a game outside of, like, honestly, World of Warcraft, because of course that is, in theory, it could be a never-ending game, and I mean, at this rate, it's never going to end, right? I can't believe that I was playing that when I was, like, I don't even know, 14, 13. Like, I started playing that game in its infancy, and it continues to trudge on, and it continues to come back in different forms, which are really, old forms. But
is it still a subscription after all these years?
Yep, wow. It's still a subscription base. And I mean, obviously, Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, there's lots of talk about that changing. Things like, perhaps they could roll the subscription into Game Pass. Obviously, it's, that would be a significant hit. So maybe just a discount, something like that. But anyways, like even when I was big into Modern Warfare, I was never thinking about what is the future of Modern Warfare. I was thinking about what is the next Call of Duty, right? Because those were made by different developers under, the same umbrella of Activision. And they would kind of iterate on one another. So Overwatch is such a strange game because the original one was never meant to be like that. And they were kind of forced into that. And now, of course, we have Overwatch 2, which, most people, especially when it first launched, were kind of calling it Overwatch 1.5 and everything like that. I guess my hope for the game would just be that we get some form of consistency. If they're going to support the game, they continue to support it in a way that helps it be the best it can be. And of course, I would also hope that they make smart decisions to keep growing the game. Because really that's kind of been the struggle, I think, with Overwatch. Again, their vision was never to have this ongoing live service game. But you look at a Fortnite, and of course it was a juggernaut, but you look at an Apex Legends, and it's had its own success. And you look at a lot of these sort of competitors, and they've, in a lot of ways, figured it out. They all have their challenges, but they've figured it out. They've figured out how to keep it going, how to keep building. And I think most of what you hear online about Overwatch is that they haven't figured that out. And I think in a lot of ways that's people who aren't really that invested, because I do think the game has certainly improved. And another thing with Overwatch that I've talked about a lot is I think season 4 of Overwatch 2 was the first time we really saw the vision for what the team wanted Overwatch 2 to be. Of course, PvE aside, because that went through its own whole thing. I think that was the first season where we really saw the content, the theming, these special modes and things like that. That said to me, if that had been the launch of Overwatch 2 back in October of the previous year, people would have been a lot hotter on the game. And then after that, we had, that was the Star Watch season. After that, we had the Quest Watch season, which I think only built on that. And then, of course, we had Invasion, which was the biggest, most content-heavy season we had seen. And now, of course, we're in season 7 with Rise of Darkness and everything like that. And I do think that one kind of, not pumped the brakes, but slowed down a little bit. But you can kind of see reasoning behind it because it's, of course, the Halloween event, which is traditionally a very popular one. So they didn't need to put as much content into it. And anyways, this is all a very long-winded way of me saying, I think they're starting to put the pieces together and deliver the vision that they really want to. And I think when they're able to fully execute on that, that's when you can see the care and love put into the game, and hopefully the audience responds to it in a positive way to keep supporting it, keep building on what they have. So
no, totally, I agree. I think the consistency, now that we actually have seasons, we know what to expect, and it's not just suddenly we're doing crazy balance modes. It's how you build a game. It's giving people something to follow and to rally behind. I know you have a beautiful message to the world, and I would love to end the episode with it, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And so, audience, thank you so much for following along. I'm just going to do a quick little shout out, and then we're going to let Jordan end with his message to the world of Overwatch. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to Cheers Love, an Overwatch League fan retrospective podcast, where we interview fans about their favorite memories and immortalize them on the internet. If you enjoyed what you listened to, please check out some of our other shows on Grow Up Level Up, including the Grow Up Level. Cool, I'm fumbling over my own title. Grow Up Level Up show, where we interview folks about the fun and games that help them grow up, as well as You Gulu, a show where we talk about life skills that you might be able to put into your life, including time blocking and maybe your morning routine. If you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Please consider following me and the show on all social media. You can find me at SamsonXP. You can follow the show at Grow Up Level Up. And don't forget to leave a comment about what you thought. I do read through all of them, and I do really appreciate it when people let me know what they think, good or bad. I really like to know what you think about the show. So, as we close out the show, I did say that Jordan has prepared something for all the Overwatch League fans in the world. I know I'm hyping it up. I don't mean to make it like the biggest deal in the world. But Jordan, the floor is yours. What is your message to the world?
So just to preface this a bit, after the Overwatch League ended and everything, of course, there was There were a lot of emotions, especially being there and everything like that. And over on Twitter, I actually saw that Ash Parrish, who works for The Verge, put out a tweet basically saying, if you have a story to share about Overwatch League, obviously this is a powerful community. Reach out to me for a piece I want to do. I reached out to Ash Parrish. I basically just sent this thing that I'm about to read. I have no idea if it will be featured in anything like that, but my fingers are crossed that you may come across this later on. The other side of that, of course, is that I did actually also read this on my grand finals episode of Man Watchpoint. So if you've heard it before, well, hey, thanks for listening to my podcast as well. But if not, then hopefully you're hearing it here. So let me dive in there. So back in 2020, I started a podcast called Man Watchpoint, dedicated to covering all things Overwatch. I had been playing the game since launch and started following the league shortly after the start of Stage 2 of Year 2 of the Overwatch League. In doing so, I began to follow others in the community and seeking out other media around Overwatch. I was eventually invited to join the podcast ReadySetPwn, a podcast covering the Vancouver Titans and eventually expanding into covering the Toronto Defiant. For me, the podcast has always been remote. I live one province away from my co-hosts, whom I've never met in person, and in a province that is not home to either Canadian Overwatch League team. I've always been a lurker online, so I'm not big on Defiant Cord or Titans Cord, the Toronto Defiant and Vancouver Titans Discords, of course. With Grand Finals being in Canada and possibly the final Grand Finals ever, I knew I had to make the trip. I connected with a couple of people I knew from the Toronto Defiant community, and after meeting up with them at Grand Finals, I was welcomed into the most friendly and joyous community I could ever imagine. Everyone was there to celebrate the Overwatch League, but what surprised me the most was that it seemed like, without knowing it, everyone was there to make new friends. At any given moment, you could turn to the person behind you in line or sitting next to you in the stands and strike up a conversation that would soon turn into a friendship. It was truly an eye-opening experience that showed me just how deeply we all love this product. Each night, I went out with a handful of newfound friends, and we ate together, we laughed together, and when all was said and done, we cried together. The feeling of being in that stadium with one another when they played the goodbye video and when Zoe gave her farewell speech was palpable. We all felt such an immense joy and yet sadness at the same time for the end of an era. For me, I cling to the fact that I will probably never have an experience quite like this again. To follow something... Getting all choked up here. To love something and to experience something. Oh my gosh, I gotta take a minute. Whew. This didn't even happen on my own episode. To follow something, to love something, and to experience something so stellar, and to get to see it through to the end, it was something special that I'll cherish forever. I've made new friends and found new family, and for that I'm forever grateful to have been a tiny part of this league. That's it.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Audience, we'll catch you next time.